Tennessee, for some of us old traditional rival type old timers of sorts, it still rings true. It still means something to us. Of course, Tennessee's way down, and it's not necessarily the game on the national map that people are looking to, but mighty important for the Florida Gators in keeping their SEC Eastern Division hopes alive after a narrow escape in Lexington. We got Jackie Franchuli on the line from Rivals Platform for Florida. It's Gators territory. Please check out her work right there. Jackie, how you doing today?
Busy, but I'm doing well, Mark.
Yeah, appreciate you stopping by to talk some Florida football. And the reason for the busy schedule is, of course, Felipe Frank's injury, Kyle Trask coming into the game, and people around the nation scurrying to figure out who this guy is. We've talked about him. Of course, you've covered him for quite some time. He's been in the quarterback room and in the quarterback battle before, so he's no mystery to Florida fans. And he accredited himself quite well against Kentucky with the game on the line.
Yeah, he did. And honestly, he's still a mystery to some Florida fans, to be honest. You know, although Mark, I think we talked about him extensively. I think one of our chats, a year ago during spring, Dan Mullen's first spring, when that big quarterback battle was brewing between Felipe Franks and Kyle Trask, I actually said that Kyle Trask was looking better than Franks at that point. When we were watching him in the spring, prior to his injury last year, Kyle Trask always seemed like the more accurate passer. I think Felipe Franks has done a good job kind of catching up and even surpassing him a little bit the last year or so. But Kyle Trask has always been an accurate passer. The question for him was, could he be a willing runner? Now, we saw a little bit of his ability to run against Kentucky, but he isn't that running quarterback. He is more of that pocket passer. And I think he does a really good job as a pocket passer. I think it really opens up the passing game for Florida. I think that's really exciting to see. And I think that might, on the other flip side, open up the running game, because that's obviously the run. They've been struggling on the ground a lot. So it'll be really interesting to see how Dan Mullen kind of adapts the offense with Kyle Trask, because he's able to go in the air a lot more. Now, the only thing that worries me about Kyle Trask when you're passing a lot more, obviously sometimes Kyle Trask can maybe throw a few balls and force a few balls that maybe aren't there. So there might be more picks in this situation, while Felipe Franks might use his legs a little bit more. If he needs to get a yard or two or just move the chains a little bit, Kyle Trask might force one or two throws. That's one of my questions I do have with Kyle Trask. And the other question I have is, right now, Kyle Trask hasn't started the game since his high school freshman season. So no team has stayed there in their defensive scout room and said, this is what that quarterback does. This is what Trask does. Kentucky didn't study Kyle Trask. They were studying Felipe Franks. And when this guy came out and played very differently than the other guy under center, they were kind of caught off guard. Tennessee will have a couple of days to watch some tape of Kyle Trask. You're going to see him during the game last year against Missouri, where he came up in cleanup duty. He was able to play a few things against UT Martin. He was able to play, obviously, in Kentucky in that comeback win. So Tennessee has the ability to actually have some tape on Kyle Trask now. So that's the interesting thing, is how is Kyle Trask going to be able to handle when a defense knows what to expect from a quarterback?
So it's an interesting take that you have, because this is not an NFL scouting combine in which Felipe Franks has all the measurables physically in terms of arm talent, running ability, height, the broad shoulders, the weight, everything that adds up to NFL prospect, even though he might be a large developmental prospect in that role. Well, Kyle Trask may never reach that type of consideration, but in the moment, he might be a more accurate passer, be able to deliver the ball in different windows, anticipate, do some things in the passing game that maybe Felipe Franks doesn't. Although, again, on the flip side, you bring into question Felipe Franks' ability in the run game, and Kyle Trask knowing in the back of his mind as the pocket closes, hey, I'm a passer, not a runner. I don't think I can do that. And maybe having to throw that 2 or 3 passes a game, which he may pull off, or he may turn over to the other side.
Yeah, to be fair, he did pull it off against Kentucky. I think if you go into the fourth quarter, when they were in, I think, the UK 38-yard line, I want to say, if I remember correctly, and he saw two defenders come at him, and he had a Kentucky defender right at his face. He slid a little bit to the side in his pocket and then was able to throw to Kyle Pitts for a 30-yard reception. So I think he has the capability to move around inside the pocket. I think he's really good and mobile inside the pocket, and he reads the defenses pretty quickly. I think Josh Hammond put it pretty well. He's more decisive in his throws. So I think he has that capability. I'm just not going to say he's fantastic or better yet because I haven't seen him play against a defense that has scouted him before. I think it will be great to see those mismatches that, you know, the Florida wide receivers provide, the Florida tight ends. I think Kyle Trask's ability of being a better passer could bring those guys in. We know that Florida has some of the best wide receivers in the SEC. That's one of the most talented wide receiver rooms in the country. So it'll be interesting to see how Dan Mullen kind of uses that to his advantage, something that I've been wanting this season against Miami when Florida had such a big height advantage. Against Kentucky, they had such a big height advantage, and they really only used those mismatches towards the end of the game. To be fair, they tried early in Miami, but Felipe Franks overthrew the ball against Van Jefferson, I think, early on in that first quarter. So now you have a guy who's a little more accurate in the passing game. So I would see that a little bit opened up, and hopefully that allows the running game to kind of build up, because it's been frustrating to see a guy like Michael Pirine amassing yards more in the passing game than in the run game. So I think that's something that will be nice to see on Saturday, hopefully for Florida, and see how they can have more of a balanced offense moving forward.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We got Jackie Franchuli on the line from Gators territory. Join her and the rest of the staff there at Rivals covering Florida football with a big matchup at home in the Swamp, noon Saturday Eastern time against the Tennessee Vols. So the takeaway can go one of two different ways from the Kentucky game, as we both know. On the one side, it could be, oh, we've got a number of warning signs. We escaped, but there are warning signs. We better fix some problems because tougher teams are coming down the road, i.e. we know the team from the state up north. Or in LSU, I think before that. Or on the other hand, at the conclusion of any championship season or successful season, even if it doesn't culminate with a championship of sorts, there are near misses. In difficult environments, in difficult situations, faced by adversity, in which a team found a way to win, in which maybe they were outplayed for 45 or 50 minutes of the game and they found a way. So we got the silver lining, and then we've got the red flags and the warning signs to come. So where do you sort that out?
Yeah, you know, when you look at the schedule right now, after such an emotional win, not only did they beat Kentucky on the road on a comeback victory, but they also lost their team leader. Felipe Franks is, you know, loved by this team. I know a lot of people in the national media were kind of dogging Felipe Franks a little bit and talking about his immaturity and saying he needs to grow up. But honestly, he is loved by every single person in that program, coaches, staff, team members. You saw it on Saturday when they all went up to him as soon as he was injured. They all respect him. They saw him in the locker room post game. That's a big loss. That's a big personality you're missing in the huddle. That's a big personality you're missing on the sidelines. You're missing in the locker room during the halftime. So that's an adjustment right there. Kyle Trask is a different type of leader. I know Josh Hammond told me that he is vocal, but Felipe Franks is just another level when it comes to his personality. So that is going to be adjustment. And then we see the noon kickoff against Tennessee. Florida has been having a lot of problems with those early kickoffs. They've had a lot of slow starts. Who remembers Vandy last year after some emotional wins before the bye week, before they talked about Georgia? They had a slow start in Nashville. That is a problem under Dan Mullen's tenure. And we even seen it against Kentucky when the defense started a little bit slow early on. So that is something that you have to think about going into Saturday. When you look at it, Tennessee is a perfect trap game. People think Florida is the overwhelming favorite. Tennessee is struggling, but there's a lot of things that Florida is going to have to kind of twink here a little bit of there with, you know, a new quarterback. Are they going to play Emory Jones? How much are they going to play Emory Jones? Because Dan Mullen wants to play a 2-quarterback system. So there are a lot of things they're going to learn on the go. And then you're also thinking, how is that noon kickoff going to affect this team as well? So a lot of questions for Florida as you move forward. And when you think CJ Henderson didn't play against Kentucky, Jabari Zuniga didn't play most of the game against Kentucky. Amari Burney didn't play against Kentucky. All those injuries at Kentucky, most of them are expected to play on Saturday. Amari Burney looks like he's going to play. CJ Henderson is likely, but it's kind of day to day. They're kind of looking at the ankle. And Jabari Zuniga also sprained his ankle against Kentucky, and that's a guy that should be good to go, but they're not saying for definite if he is good to go. So that's something we're watching. So although I'm pretty confident in Florida going to this game, again, this is the perfect trap game scenario when you look at it in the bigger picture, because I'm not going to say they're looking ahead, but if you think about it, they have Tennessee, Towson, two pretty, the easiest game on the schedule. And then you go homecoming against Auburn. Then you've got on the road to LSU. You're on the road to South Carolina. So a lot of big games are coming up. So if you look at it, is the perfect game to have a slow start and stumble.
Jackie, as you compare and contrast Trask and Franks, what I immediately envisioned as I'm going to be sitting at home on my couch watching the game is those cutaway shots on the sideline are going to be more of Trask sitting on the bench, headsets on, listening to his instructions and what he did right, what he did wrong in the previous series, and maybe a little less of, yelling at the crowd and high-fiving people and going crazy in regards to interactions with the fans. A little bit different approach possibly from Kyle Trask. Now, that's off the field, on the sideline, the periphery. But in terms of game planning and execution, you spoke to the obvious differences in skill sets. Has Dan Mullen spoken to what could be the approach, or we just do what we do?
Dan Mullen said we do what we do. He said, when we asked him, how does this offense change when you have Kyle Trask and Emory Jones on their center? Because those two are also very different. Emory Jones is better with his legs. Kyle Trask is better with his arms. And he says nothing really changes. It just, we give him the same play and the play just looks differently with both of them. And that's how he's approaching it. He's not changing his game plan. He said that during Kentucky, he actually had packages ready to go for Emory Jones. So he's already got everything kind of set. He's not changing. He's not deviating from it much. I think what's going to be interesting is how much of that two quarterback system are we going to see? Are you, against Kentucky, he had Emory Jones ready to go with a package, but when you have Kyle Trask playing the way he is, you're not going to disrupt that momentum. So how is he going to work with Emory Jones? When Emory Jones is out there, you're automatically going to assume it's going to be a running game, a running play. So how is he going to disguise that? How is he going to work those two into the game? And, even Dan Mullen kind of shrugged and said, hey, who's to say both of those quarterbacks are not going to be on the field at the same time? So it'll be very interesting to see how that dynamic kind of plays out. And I think why this would work for Florida is because of who Kyle Trask is. This is a guy who did not transfer from his high school team after he was named the backup. This is a guy who didn't transfer from Florida after Felipe Franks was really entrenched as the starter. So if you're going to have a two quarterback system, you want a guy like Kyle Trask on your team because he's willing to do whatever it takes for your program. I joked the last few weeks that he's Matt Saracen from Friday Night Lights. He's taking over the reins and he's kind of just enjoying his moment right now and just taking his opportunities. And it's just ironic that he looks like Matt Saracen, just a little bit bigger. And he has a tire in front of his front porch in Texas where he practices accuracy by going in it. So it's a perfect Friday Night Lights scenario. I think Hollywood wouldn't have written it better, Mark.
Yeah, this is the kid that this is what college football is about. He's gone to school at Florida. He is committed to Florida. He signed and he is staying at Florida regardless. And he's competed and it's not gone his way, but he's continued to learn and progress. And now he has his chance. He had his first moment. He's obviously been on the field in the past, but in terms of big game on the line, he came through. He pulled it out. He got the job done. The Kentucky field goal kicker helped him out a little bit there, but who knows what would have happened in the final minute. But he got the job done and let it come back to a win against Kentucky, and now it's his team. And we'll see what ensues from here. Jackie Franchuli on the line helping us set up Florida and Tennessee. Mentioning the point spread, Jackie reminds me I've got my predictions available for everyone in the description section below next to the link, Voice of College Football Community. And I saw the 14-point spread. And sure, I immediately thought, this looks enticing. Florida's a 14-point favorite. They should win this game by 4 or 5 touchdowns. But I think Vegas knows what they're doing, and they know exactly what you just spoke to in regards to division game. Tennessee's more talented and better than what they've shown. Florida's obviously could be looking ahead. We can't get into the hearts and minds of players, but it speaks to trap game, despite the weight of what Tennessee and Florida is historically. I don't know that sits with the players from week to week in regards to their preparation. One last thing, Jackie, would just be looking at the rest of the team and your thoughts about what you saw in at least 2 of the 3 meaningful games in which they were tested and taken to the limit. Because I have Florida, and this seems a bit ridiculous, but as I explain my system, I have them ranked as the number 5 team in the country. I don't believe that they're the 5th best team in the country, but they have collected 2 wins that nobody else has in the country. I believe they have 2 wins that rank higher than any 2 wins for any team in the country as it stands right now. So the resume in terms of results is very good. They were shaky getting to that conclusion, but they got the job done. In regards to looking again at the other units, besides quarterback, of course, offensive line comes into question. Your thoughts about just anything that stood out to you that you are either feeling good about or concerned about going forward?
Yeah, sure. I know Florida hasn't had the easiest of routes to get here. Miami was definitely not pretty, and they got a lot of negative feedback from that Miami game, which I've actually, when I looked back on it, yeah, they weren't sharp. Felipe Franks got so much criticism in that game, but when you look at it, he didn't have such a horrible game. I was actually floored when you watch and you broke down film. He didn't have such a bad game to get such bad criticism for 2 whole weeks. But yeah, when you look at Florida, the questions I still have, and I've had these since the preseason, is the O-line. The O-line is doing great in pass protection. Don't get me wrong. I think that's going to be a huge benefit moving forward with Kyle Trask under center. But in the run game, they're not getting much of a push forward. So they're not getting good enough push to establish that ground game. Well, Michael Pirine has not been able to really start going on what we expected to be this big senior year for him. So I want to see more from that offensive line. But it's not just the O-line. It's more about a team's effort in general when it comes to the run game. Their tight ends, Kyle Pitts and Lucas Kroll, have missed some blocking assignments. Then Keon Zipper came in against Kentucky and then had a really bad timed holding call, which took away a touchdown for Florida. So I think the tight end group really needs to step it up when it comes to blocking. Now, they did a good job in that big Josh Hammond touchdown at the end of the game. Lucas Kroll and Kyle Pitts had those 2 blocks that really made that play happen. But again, they need to do that in a consistent basis. And last year, they had a guy called Seontae Lewis. He graduated. He's gone. He was one of their best blockers on the team. Jordan Scarlett was a really big blocker. They're missing those guys. Right now, they don't have those 2 guys. And I think they're trying to find those guys that they were blocking. So that's what the 2 questions I have when it comes to the offense. Defensively, I think right now, the defensive front is doing okay. They did a really good job against an inexperienced Miami team. Obviously, they racked up 10 sacks. But against a really strong Kentucky O-line, they got pushed around in that first half. The O-line was able to really go into the second level and produce and, get those turned down conversions early on. They were able to adapt and adjust in the second half. But again, that comes down to those slow starts I talked about earlier. So that is something that they need to change when they have a stronger offensive line they're facing off. And that also could be the fact that Jabari Zuniga didn't play a lot in that game. He played in the first drive, got hurt, came in the second half, and then he didn't play again after that first drive in the second half. But he is expected to be back. Now, the big question for me in the defense is that secondary. Now, obviously, you got C.J. Henderson and Marco Wilson if C.J. Henderson is healthy. But then you've got freshmen, Jaden Hill, Chester Kimbrough, and Curry Elam. Now, Elam's already have 2 picks on the year, and he's doing really, really well. But again, these are freshmen that are learning as they play. Trey Dean has been working at star, but even against Kentucky, he had to move to corner because Amari Burney was out. So with Amari Burney out and CJ Henderson out, they didn't have that other option at star. So I think that is something that you got to look for, because then you got Trey Dean moves to corner, and then you have the question at safety. You've got Sean Davis, Donovan Steiner, Brad Stewart, who just came back from a suspension. How do you rotate those guys? Right now, a lot of their big play mistakes have come because some of those secondary guys are out of position. So what is the best rotation? I know Sean Davis told us yesterday that they asked Ron English to establish their rotation so they know ahead of time when they play. But do you want to have that rotation when there's obviously guys like Sean Davis who are having such a good season? He had 2 picks against Kentucky. He's obviously having a good season. Why do you want to rotate a guy that's having great momentum out of your game? You want to keep Sean Davis in there. You want to keep Brad Stewart in there. So that's a question moving forward, is do they keep this rotation, especially when you have a guy like Jaywan Taylor, who was such a sure tackler last year, but now it seems like his shoulder is really bothering. He was in the non-contact jersey yesterday during practice, and it seemed like that game against Miami, when that touchdown, I think it was Bevan Jordan maybe that scored that touchdown against Miami. Jaywan Taylor didn't really go with and didn't lower his shoulder in that tackle. By not lowering his shoulder in that tackle, he missed it, and Miami was able to score that touchdown. So I understand that the players want to have a rotation, and maybe that's something that they want to do, but that's something I question. Why establish a rotation and take out Sean Davis? Because when Sean Davis was not on the field against Kentucky, there were some mistakes. Like, for example, the targeting call against Donovan Steiner. And, there was also sometimes a pass interference calls called as well. So I'm curious to see if maybe that changes moving forward, if those mistakes persist in the secondary.
The Vols and the Gators at the Swamp at noon on Saturday. And when I see those 2 uniforms on the same field, I'll be thinking back to Heath Schuler and Peyton Manning and Danny Werfel and Tim Tebow and Chris Leak and on down the line, T. Martin and so forth. But of course, it's about Kyle Trask executing in the moment in his first start against an SEC Eastern Division rival in a pretty desperate Tennessee team. So they should come out fighting and ready to go against the Gators. Jackie Franchuli joining us to talk Florida, Tennessee. Please join her and the rest of the staff there at Gators territory. Jackie, enjoy the game and have a great week, and we appreciate you stopping by.
Thanks for having me, Mark.